Great, I'll get us started. Um, Kyle, I don't know if you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Yep, I will do that right now. Let's
Okay,
see.
I'll go ahead and start the intro. Hello, everyone. I'm Parthivi Das, Executive Director of C2HR, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to today's latest installment of our HR Learning Series. Today's topic is focused on human capital trends that help organizations thrive. For its 2025 Global Human Capital Trends Research, Deloitte surveyed more than 10,000 leaders from 93 countries to determine top trends around three areas. And today's speakers will help us dive into those findings. Our speakers are from Deloitte, Abel Sun, Principal, Technology, Media, and Entertainment, and Kyle Forrest, Principal at Deloitte Consulting. Before we start today's session, we wanted to share some information on upcoming programs. Next week, please join us for Coffee and Convo on May 14th, where we'll have an interactive session on return to work and its many perspectives. To register, please visit our website at c2hr.org. Registration is now open for the 2025 C2HR Con being held on July 28th and 29th in Brooklyn, New York. Please visit our website to learn more about our sessions and our speakers. C2HR is able to offer free, quality educational programs for our members, like today's learning series, thanks to the generous support of our 2025 sponsors, including Deloitte. We sincerely appreciate your support. For today's webinar, we'd like it to be interactive and invite you to post questions in the chat throughout the discussion. SHRM has approved today's session for one CEE credit, and that code will be shared at the end of our session and be sent to you later on. Abel and Kyle, we can't thank you enough for sharing your insights with us today. And so now I will turn it over to you.
All right. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining. Hope everyone had a good weekend. Just as Parthivi said, I'm a principal in Deloitte. I primarily serve our clients in tech, media, and entertainment and sports. And I'm thankful for this opportunity to share what is one of Deloitte's largest research and survey that we do annually around the global human capital trends. Also, very grateful that this is our, I think, third year being a sponsor for C2HR and helping to sort of grow and develop this amazing community of HR professionals and leaders. We did this Global Human Capital Trends report presentation last year, and we brought some elements of it to the conference last August as well. And we're really excited to kind of show you the new research that we've uncovered over the next 40 minutes or so. Um, I think this report has like 13,000 or so respondents, over 2,000 plus executives across 93 countries. So point being is it's a global report. It touches on both business and HR leaders. And so we're really confident that this is a very comprehensive look into the insights of workforce, and the organization. So with that, let me turn it over to my colleague Kyle here to get us started.
Thanks, Abel, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Kyle Forrest. I'm our Future of HR leader at Deloitte. So I work with CHROs and business leaders to understand what are some of those factors that are both external or internal to the organization impacting the future of the HR function and how it drives value for the function, the professionals within the function, and for the enterprise and the workforce at large. And that's somewhat at the crux of our human capital trends report. It's not an HR report full of HR issues. It's a business report with business issues. And Abel noted it's global, a ton of respondents year over year, longest longitudinal report of its kind. And this year's report actually built on something that we introduced last year, which was that we at Deloitte believe organizations need to focus on business and human outcomes at the same time to really drive value for the organizations and the workforce. And this year, what we were digging into was then a theme of how do you take some of the tensions between those choices that organizations face and turn that into triumph or turn uncertainty into opportunity. And as we were looking at a number of tensions that organizations are facing today, of which you see a few on this page, at Deloitte, we believe these are not either or choices. They are both and. So on the left-hand side of the page, the kind of tension that most organizations have been dealing with and is probably most frequently in the media over the last 2 years is automation or augmentation. And it's a both and, right? There are tasks you all are going to automate, and you are then going to augment the humans who had been doing those tasks or who are using those AI and automation capabilities, right? Uh, there's a trend we're going to click in today relative to stability and agility, right? And what do workers and executives want in terms of more stable careers and more agile deployment of teams and work throughout the organization to drive business and human outcomes that much faster. So that is kind of our overarching theme of the trends report, how to turn tensions into triumph. And then there were three kind of subgroupings of the trends that we got into. The topic of work, really, how do I, as a business leader and HR leader, ensure the right work is being done and in an optimal way, right? How do I think about worker capacity, productivity, and how do we make sure that we're not just slapping AI and automation capabilities on top of processes and getting incremental gains? And instead, how are we fundamentally redesigning the work that we're doing with the right mix of human and machines to drive outcomes? From a workforce perspective, then, how do I access, develop, and motivate the necessary workforce? We were very deliberate with all of those word choices in that sentence, that question out to people, right? Access meaning it's not always just a full-time hire, right? Is it part-time, contingent, gig, a third party? And now, everyone determining, do I call a digital FTE, a team member, a tool? A lot of things on that front. And then whatever that workforce type is, how do I onboard, develop, retain, grow their careers, and motivate, really acknowledging a lot of the nuances at the individual level, how to get the work done. And lastly, if you're doing the right work and you have the right workforce, but you're not behaving the right way, are you truly going to achieve value? That led to the thrust of the question, do I have the right organization and culture to enable that performance? So those three themes then led into the 8 trends themselves, which we're going to give a deep dive into with you all today. And again, feel free to ask questions, in the chat or kind of raise a hand along the way, and we'll dig in. So with that, just to give you a little bit of a roadmap of how the conversation is going to go, we're going to start with these 2 trends around work. Then we'll go into the 3 around workforce, and then we'll go into the 3 on org and culture. We'll also have a couple of polling questions at the end of each of those kind of overarching themes to get your input. So let's talk about our first trend, stagility. This is the one trend where we had to make up a word to describe what we were kind of seeing and thinking about. And really, it gets at the data that we have on the right-hand side of the page here. As Abel noted, we had over 13,000 respondents weigh in on the survey. We also cut the survey into executives and workers to get some different points of view. And 75% of workers responded to the survey saying they want more stability in their career. They want more stability at work. There are a lot of changes going on in the world outside of the walls of the organization. Also, a lot of changes happening in the organization. There was data that said, 7 to 10 years ago, workers would see maybe 2 large-scale organizational changes in a given year. Now that's up to something like 10, right? And so workers are craving more stability. On the other end of the spectrum, executives, 85% of leaders want more agile work. Those 2 things somewhat feel in conflict, right? Regardless of whether you're a knowledge worker, a frontline worker, whatever it may be, and then the executive, perspective. And so our call kind of to action for organizations and to workers is to think about, is there an opportunity to find stability in being agile? Right? Find stability in being comfortable with discomfort, comfortable with ambiguity, and understanding that organizations will help you as a worker to upskill, reskill, learn, find alternative career paths, drive some value in different ways from an organizational perspective. And we kind of looked at then what are some of those sources of instability that are impacting workers today? What was potentially anchoring that original maybe source of stability that has gone away, right? Thus leading to instability, and what might be a new anchor, right, for people to ground themselves on, to people for them to get a little bit more stability in the world that we live in today, right? There's just a couple that I'll call out, and then Abel would kind of love your kind of take and perspective as well. But I'll start, in the middle of the work bucket at the top, the how teams work. We'll touch on this in the reimagining the role of the manager trend later as well. We've seen organizations get flatter and more fluid, right? And so there was an old anchor kind of that was around a hierarchical org structure performing very specific tasks. And now, how do you maybe get workers across all functions and levels more comfortable with what is the outcome versus an output that's being driven, right? And how do you take actions based on data to go drive outcomes, right? So I'll pause here for a moment. I see a couple things come in the chat briefly, but Abel, also, welcome your input on where you're kind of seeing some of this play out, within organizations as well.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. I mean, a real example I could think of, and one of the companies I work with is, when there are a lot of cross-enterprise initiatives, especially in companies that have media engineering, there's usually an engineering department or function, and there's an IT function. And the leaders quickly realize that for them to be successful, a lot of your modern day IT professionals need to have some fundamental engineering skill sets. The engineering leadership team realizes as you kind of look at the future of the role of the media engineer, and this was actually discussed heavily at the National Association of Broadcasters show in Las Vegas a few weeks ago, is that they also need to have some very fundamental IT skill sets as well, versus trying to build those skill sets within those two teams. One of the things they talked about was how you could have these workers be more fluid and work across the board. And so one of the things that they did, and when we helped them with, is having sort of rotational programs where your IT professional works on an engineering project, your engineers are then rotated to IT to work on IT projects. Things that they realize is, cultures are very different, but one of the ways of having this sort of fluidity and how they work across IT engineering is that they can come to appreciate how work gets done differently, and really focus more on the work itself versus how they're organized, and the roles and so on and so forth. So that's just one real example of how they could kind of demonstrate that agility, but also, according to a lot of their people, is having more stability because a lot of them are now working together towards a common outcome.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Abel. So I'm gonna keep us going forward to the next trend under the work bucket, which was really all around reclaiming organizational capacity and acknowledging that sometimes maybe everyone here is going to kind of nod their head or have an example in the kind of pursuit of efficiency, productivity. Sometimes as gains are provided, the new work, additional work that gets dumped onto workers and leaders uh, is busy work, right? And so that led to this kind of chapter title of when work gets in the way of work. Um, and I'll really drive your eyes to the right-hand side of the page here, which is that we, through the research and the survey responses, found that 41% of daily work folks were saying was being spent on non-essential activities, right? I'm searching for knowledge and my knowledge management system or is hard to navigate within the company, or I'm spending time on overly complicated process steps while I'm out in the field trying to help a customer or close a sale, right? And I have to jump through more steps than I should to get an approval or to do something, right? And at the bottom, only 22% of respondents were saying that their organization is extremely or very effective at simplifying work, right? And if you then think about this overarching, narrative in the world over the last, 2.5 years, especially early this calendar year, with a few different announcements from companies saying things like, "Hey, we're gonna really scrutinize new hiring until we decide if AI can do it first." That gets to the crux of this question of how do I unlock worker capacity and how should it be used, right? And it's going to be incredibly critical for organizations to think through um, what are the work activities? Where is AI and automation being applied to do those activities differently? And as that capacity of tasks is taken on by AI and automation and freed with the humans, how do I unlock it and use it differently, right? Do I upskill and reskill my people to do different things? Do I give them the time and space to think, focus, maybe innovate on new products, think about new market entry, be creative, right? So there's a lot of companies that are really thinking through what does that look like from a go forward perspective, and then also acknowledging other demographic trends that are going on, right? Depending on the countries that your organization is in, there are, multiple generations in the workforce. Within 4 years, everyone in the baby boomer generation will have hit retirement age. And in 4 years, also everyone in Gen Z will have hit 18 plus and be a working age adult. But every generation has been retiring faster. People are living longer. They're not going to have the same type of careers, as maybe folks were traditionally used to. And so being really intentional with how that worker capacity gets used as it gets freed up is important. So we're gonna drop in a polling question here. Um, and that it should be up on your screen. So if you, as a leader, as a worker, had an extra 10% of capacity, what would be the biggest benefit that you would achieve? And you can choose up to three. You do not have to choose all three. You can choose one or two if you like.
Yeah, and just to comment that Kyle said, taking the time to understand the impacts of AI on your work, the workforce is important. There's another element, of course, Kyle also talked about is then taking the demographic, the culture nuances. What I've seen is a lot of companies do one but not the other. And I think if any of your organizations are going to undertake that sort of internal review or reflection of how AI will impact your organization, you also got to look at your demographics, who your workers are, what type of workers you have, their demographics, because I think a more comprehensive solution requires that you kind of dig into both of those questions.
Okay. All right. So from a polling question perspective, interesting split. So the single highest was enhanced well-being. Love to see that. Followed by improved innovation, and then a tie for greater collaboration and connection and more continuous improvement. What I really love to see about the enhanced well-being is it's a nice build, you know, from this business and human outcome perspective, right? If you focus on both, one of the human outcomes of implementing AI and automation should be a more sustainable workload, should be the ability to have a higher physical, mental, emotional well-being, right? Because now you're using AI and automation to do work that takes things off your plate and maybe enables you to be that much more focused in other, avenues from a life perspective. Okay. So I'm going to keep us going forward into the topics around workforce and really our one of our trends that links closely to that one about worker capacity is the fact that while AI is revolutionizing work for knowledge workers, but also very much still frontline and other workers, it's important to really ground for an organization what that means for your humans, right? Those that are candidates, those that are workers today, those that are your customers. And so really what we dug into with this trend was what does that mean for an organization if the organization were to update the employee value proposition to be AI forward or just acknowledge what's going on in the world relative to AI. And so what the data showed on the right-hand side is that 70% of managers and workers said that they would be more likely to join or stay with an organization if the employee value proposition explicitly called out how the organization is going to help those employees and workers thrive in an AI-driven world, right? I mean, you think about that. So many workers, leaders have some anxiety around AI and automation. What is this going to do to my work? Therefore, my role, my job, etc. And so if the employee value proposition is updated to say, here's how we're going to help you learn as we deploy AI and automation and impact certain tasks. Here's how we're going to help you upskill, reskill, be you know, fluid in your career to find new roles and opportunities. You're going to have a higher likelihood of people staying with the organization, committing themselves to that learning journey. And candidates, therefore, will also be attracted, right? They'll say, hey, I want to go join that company because they're going to help me acquire skills using AI to succeed in business, right? Now, on the bottom half of the slide, 54% of workers saying that they're concerned about the blurred distinctions between what is done by humans and technology. So that what that really means is it's explicitly important, or it is important to be explicit around where an organization is going with their AI and automation journey so that workers, humans know, here's how the tools will be used. Therefore, here's how I, as the human, will evolve my career, how I will be augmented, etc. Um, and what I want to also make sure that folks are thinking about, because this is not always some of the narrative in the news and some of the research that is getting put highest, is that there's a very common set of things you'll hear on the left-hand side that it's going to just make things easier, right? We're going to learn, it's going to reduce my workload. But there's things that aren't being talked about as loudly. And that, for example, if AI and automation capabilities are being deployed to tackle easier tasks, routine tasks, transactional tasks, the work being done by humans might actually be more cognitively difficult. So you might have people spending their time grappling with difficult challenges, making difficult decisions, engaging in challenging conversations, which at the end of the day means they're more mentally fatigued and perhaps thus having a challenge from a mental and emotional well-being perspective. So how do you thus balance some of these things and therefore also think about what does that mean for redesigning what the work day looks like or what the work week looks like to acknowledge potentially harder work? Um, Shelley, those companies would need to walk the walk to back up what they're saying, essentially providing examples of how. Absolutely, right? So I think that's where there have been some recent examples of where I've seen companies like make these claims into the market about how they're going to be AI powered first. And what's missing in the announcement for me is a more explicit, here's what we're going to do for the workers in our organization or for the candidates. Because a couple of the announcements I've seen have just basically said, we have invested in and implemented tools and you can now self-learn as a worker, right? That puts the onus on the worker versus acknowledging the shared responsibility for the organization to help workers invest in learning how to use a tool, how to upskill, reskill, and evolve with their roles along the way. Abel, I'll pause. Looked
Yeah,
like
that
you were going to weigh in with a
just
thought.
it's
Go
just
ahead.
the other is just the issue of trust. I think companies who are I think will do better if their leaders would be more honest about how AI is impacting the organization, how they're thinking about integrating AI into work. I think Shelley's point is a really good one. We see such large pronouncements about how AI will elevate everyone, will improve the customer experience, the guest experience, will improve everything. You see these announcements in the media, but then, you hear kind of often crickets within internal communications, town halls, et cetera, and then it tends to be more take a more of a conservative approach of what is allowed and not allowed. I think there is a bit of a bridge that I think leaders can embed in creating more trust around the impact of AI to the organizations and be honest and transparent about some of those decisions that leaders are thinking about making or making for the organization.
Okay, I'll keep us moving forward. So the next trend really is one that builds on the last two, and is one that I even have seen a lot of commentary online in the last 48, 72 hours in response to an article by The Atlantic. This is all about closing the experience gap, and almost this question that we were seeing folks ask, organizations ask about, why are my new hires not ready to contribute? And what the data was showing in our research on the right-hand side of the page was 66% of leaders saying their recent hires, primarily early career hires, weren't fully prepared to really drive outcomes at their organization, and leaders were citing a lack of experience. And 61% of employers recently were increasing experience requirements, and entry-level roles were now requiring 2 to 5 years of experience. And my kind of tongue-in-cheek example was like, a job posting saying, "Do you have 3 years of Chat GPT experience?" The answer is no, of course, because it has not been available out to the kind of the wider consumer market for even 3 years yet, right? Um, but really, our call to action, there's a lot of different factors that play into this, trend at large. But our call to action for organizations is it's really important to consider, how are you defining experience? What do you want from experience, right? How do workers get experience? And the traditional view of experience for many people on the left-hand side is purely number of years in role or number of years in a field, right? And assuming number of years means this person has experience doing some type of activity or delivering on some type of outcome that you might want in this new role. And what we're challenging folks to consider on the right-hand side is what people really mean and need, right? Which is, I know that this person has applied their skills and capabilities in a real world context, and that's demonstrated that they know how to use their skills in context, right? And so there's a few different things I've kind of heard companies talking about in regards to this, and I'll even give an example. Like, do I need 10 years of someone who's got on-premise finance, ERP, technical solutions, or pick any sort of thing, or do I need 1 year of someone who's got cloud ERP, right? So they understand how to leverage the latest technology, doing work in new and different ways, right? And so it's really important for organizations to start to think about, how do they look at and determine, as they hire, as they onboard, as they develop, the application of skills in context for where organizations are trying to drive business outcomes. And I see kind of Abel dropping in the chat that this trend should resonate with many of you, given that skills-based org conversation. And yes, this absolutely ties to kind of the skills-based topic. It also ties to what a number of folks are starting to talk to, at large, which is underneath the skills level is an understanding of the work and the tasks and activities level, which is really important from an AI and automation consideration perspective. And thus, how do you think about understanding the work? What does that mean for the skills, and does the experience needed? I think the last thing I'll say here really briefly, someone said this to me in a really interesting way, which is, quote unquote, experienced or tenured leaders, tenured workers today, they have domain and functional knowledge, right? And that's what they have built their careers on. What many of the newer entrants to the workforce have right now is actually a much higher level of comfort in using some of the AI and automation capabilities, a much higher degree of adaptability and flexibility and curiosity into doing work differently. And so thus, how do you think about pairing those two things together ultimately, thus also helping those newer workers be invested in to acquire some of that domain expertise and become your leaders of the future within the next few years? Abel, anything that you would want to add to this? Also acknowledging that the kind of this group has been talking about skills-based org, through some of the sessions in the last year or so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a skills base. The other thing I think especially in the maybe perhaps, I mean, both in content and connectivity is leaning in also on the workforce ecosystem. Is that historically we've relied so much on full-time employees or your regular workers. But if you're really trying to sort of close this experience gap, there's the piece of the equation of, you know, how do you help close that gap through development, apprenticeship type programs within your organization? But the other is really broadening your aperture to look across the ecosystem, third-party providers, gig workers, freelancers. I know none of this concept is, I think, necessarily new to folks. It's applying that construct beyond those in the field, those in production, and really applying it across the entire enterprise, looking at your finance roles, HR, marketing, et cetera. And I think that's just and I think what I've seen is, especially in some of these tech companies, is one other way to close that experience gap is looking also at the entire ecosystem of possible workers, and tackling it in a more intentional and strategic way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I'm going to take us into our third trend in the workforce kind of theme, which is really getting at the fact that the old value case that organizations were using to decide on investments, work technology, workforce technology, HR technology, it's not enough for the current moment. And so the question that we were asking, that we were also being asked, is how do I get more value out of work and workforce technology? There's data that was saying 42% of organizations were citing unrealistic business cases or having a lack of data on the outcomes of an implementation as reasons for why key technology investments were failing. And when you consider the multiple millions of dollars being invested into AI and automation capabilities in work and workforce technologies that could be enterprise-wide or specific to functions, uh, that's disheartening, right, to say the least. And so 73% of executives were saying that one of their key challenges was the inability to define the right metrics to focus on, right? Which is also right was an interesting one because you would think, right, people have a clarity of, okay, going to make a technology investment. I expect it to do these things, therefore I expect these types of outcomes. Here's a metric and measure. But there's been a lot of additional complexity into the world of HR technology, work technology, workforce technology, right? In the past, on the left-hand side of the page, you might see something that's looks familiar for your organization. Maybe you had 4 or 5 major, vendors. You had a core HCM. Maybe you had a best of breed for a learning or a talent, or a contingent worker or a payroll. But you had a kind of smaller set of vendors, technologies that you were working with. They each had a set number of use cases that you were deploying. There was typically an ROI that was focused on some sort of workflow automation, some sort of potential labor savings, quantitative or qualitative, via employee manager self-service or things along those lines, right? Now, and going forward, you're actually seeing dozens, if not hundreds, of technology players because over the last 2.5 years, from an AI and automation perspective, there's been a huge focus on specific, narrow use cases that has led to an untold number of new vendors popping up for things like AI coaching, right? Or new vendors in the workforce and HR technology space that are smaller, disrupting some of the best of breed, or niche solutions in the talent acquisition, talent intelligence, core HCM space. many more use cases that a vendor can deliver, and also organizations and the vendors looking at a wider range of metrics, right? And you see even on the right-hand side of the page where that ecosystem has continued to evolve. And you can even go and double click into some of those like slices of the cheese wheel or pie, so to speak, and go into talent acquisition and have a whole nother wheel reveal itself, right? Am I talking about talent acquisition technology for scheduling, for interviewing, for assessments, right? There's a lot out there. And so, if I link some of these back to the trends that we've discussed already, how do you think about metrics that perhaps are demonstrating faster time to productivity for new hires, right? How do you think about metrics for is the technology helping my people upskill, reskill, redeploy faster based on what the AI and automation capability within the tool is able to help do? Or on the other end of the spectrum as leader, I've got greater insight into the work activities being disrupted by use cases. Therefore, what does that mean for the skills my people have? Where are those declining skills? Where are those hot skills in the external talent market? And what does that mean for how I deploy some of my dollars from a learning and development perspective? So a lot of different considerations on how do you actually think about what that technology value case looks like going forward. And the last thing I'll say is we've had some organizations start to think there's a need to stop thinking I will make the investment once and be done, right? You can't assume that just because you've implemented something, you will achieve the value. You've got to pair that with sustainable practices on the back end, acknowledging kind of the continuous improvement and monitoring and learning of how some of these use cases get deployed. And did you achieve the value? And if not, then how do you adjust along the way? So it's almost borrowing some of the mindset from a research and development function perspective that says, I'm going to make some investments, I'm going to run some experiments, I'm going to learn from those experiments, and I'm going to do my next round of investments to continue to build on driving the right value. So we're going to put up our second poll here for folks and ask you, to what extent do you believe the following either is now or will be a challenge with respect to AI and the workforce? And you can choose up to three. Options include an increased workload for the workers, more difficult work that they have to focus on if the routine tasks are impacted, um, decreasing autonomy of the worker, fewer opportunities for on-the-job learning. We'll give folks a moment to kind of see what they say.
While they're voting, Kyle, not to put you on the spot, I know you're very involved with Salesforce, and I know they're in the news a lot about using AI agents to improve that employee experience, create a more agile workforce. Any insights you could share about what Salesforce is doing, especially in light of what you just talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things that I'll share, especially, there was actually a very interesting kind of group of organizations that were brought together last Thursday in the New York office for Salesforce and what was called a work design collective. So a few things that they're doing. So number one, being very clear to the entire organization, and they've shared this very clearly externally around how the company is working at deploying agentic AI using their own product Agentforce internally across the entire organization. So to do that, they have set up a centralized kind of COE team that's responsible for intaking the use cases, determining which ones should be prioritized and have agents built. What are then the implications of a deployed agent? And what does that mean in terms of what tasks the humans in the function or team should be doing versus what tasks the agent will be doing? And thus, how does that potentially lead itself into a reskill, upskill, redeploy situation? And over what time horizon? Because when you deploy an agent on a Monday or a Friday, you don't receive the value immediately, right? You've got to let it start doing work. So that might take 2, 3 months to see, is it doing what we wanted it to do? Are we seeing the changes in the work habits change? Therefore, what does that mean to how folks get redeployed? Um, so it's part of that is acknowledging this is a journey. This is something that's continuous that has to happen, and it's not something that's an overnight fix. So then the last thing I'll say on that front is uh, the company is investing in like ongoing AI learning. They've got quarterly all company-wide AI learning days to make sure that folks are staying abreast of latest skills, latest capabilities that are deployed to employees. So that's a few things, Abel, that I definitely to share to call out. Okay. And so we've got the poll. Okay, so the biggest response for folks from a is or will be a challenge is that blurred distinction between what is done by humans and technology. That was number one by a good 15-ish%. Number two, less collaboration with people. Number three, loss of recognition and reward for people's work and insights delivered by AI. So, what I will say, on all of this is that it's important to be open with workers about how organizations are grappling with some of these challenges, right? Help the workers feel like they can be part of the solution in driving how an organization addresses this from a go forward perspective. Okay, so I'll take us into the last three trends. And so, we've spoken about the two trends around work, we've spoken about the three trends around the workforce, and now we're getting into the three trends around org and culture. So this first one, acknowledging all those, things, those factors impacting work and workforce is really thinking about what motivates your people, right? And how can we really motivate people in a way that drives higher degrees of human performance? So some really fascinating kind of data on the right-hand side, where 78% of workers say that they know what actually motivates themselves as an individual, and 33% of workers believe leadership understands their motivations. So a huge gap between workers understanding their own motivations and leaders not understanding their motivations. And when I do this live with folks in person, I kind of have people raise their hands and ask a series of questions. And I say things like, raise your hand if you had to deal with a sick family member or team member recently and cover for work. Or raise your hand, when it was earlier in April, March, if you just had spring break. Raise your hand if you had a new team member join your team. Raise your hand if you had a team member leave your team. And the gist of those questions is to say there is a baseline level of change that's constantly going on within the organization, right? And then you layer in, hey, we're going to install a new technology, or we're rolling out new values, or we're going through an M&A, right? And those are big enterprise-wide changes. And then you layer in what's happening in the world, right? Which are also really big changes and uncertainty, right? And so understanding all those things, it's critical because when you go to do something and you're asking for people to change their behavior, as an organization, as a leader, you need to understand at that individual level what's going to motivate a human to change their behavior, right? And so some of what I had mentioned, right, is there's those intrinsic things that you need to consider. There's the extrinsic factors, right? And then there's the emotion that people feel, that all of us humans feel, right? Am I feeling stress and anxiety in the moment of life or work or year? Might I be too embarrassed to ask for help around doing something differently, right? Uh, is the messaging from the organization inspiring joy or hope, right? Around the potential career options I have in a new and different way, right? So we really think there's a lot of optimism that organizations can have and share with their workers related to this, but it's important to understand all these different things that come together to really drive behavior change for humans.
And this, I mean, I know this group. We I think we had a coffee and convo a while ago around change management, right? Change is constant. When we roll out a new technology platform where we're trying to merge two companies together, we're rolling out a new program, getting aligned to a new strategy with new leadership teams. We often, I think, as change practitioners, focus on these intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. What often gets lost is the emotions, right? How people show up to work, how they feel about work, the underlying dynamics that exist between relationships, between how people choose to how they view and perceive the work. And I think as change practitioners, there's this third element that is actually key, if not foundational, right? You can't just tell people by doing X, you'll have achieve Y. Like that doesn't work, right? People need to kind of you gotta message that narrative in the context of how of this what this third piece in the Venn diagram, which is emotions. Because we're all humans, right? Where if I told Kyle like if you did Y, you're going to achieve X times more productivity. That may not actually motivate him to do it, right? I gotta look at what actually is motivating him, how he feels about his current work, so on and so forth. So just a sort of a tie through to change management, which I know we all do day in and day out.
Awesome. All right. So keeping an eye in our last 10-ish minutes, the last couple of trends we'll touch on. One was fundamentally around performance management, right? Everyone's favorite process they love to hate across I think all organizations. And so it was really asking the question of like why doesn't performance management work for organizations, right? And you see in the top right-hand corner that 61% of managers and 72% of workers were saying they do not trust their organization's performance management process, uh, which is incredibly high, right? And only 6% of organizations said they're doing great things using data and evidence to capture the value of workers' performance while enhancing worker trust, right? And so one of the things that was really important for us to dig into this topic is um, where is their process need around evaluating performance backwards looking to provide a rating that goes into a bonus or a merit increase, right? And how do you explicitly tell people, here's what we're doing, these were the goals you had, here's whether you met the goal or not, therefore this results in a bonus merit type of situation, right? And speaking on the slide just before on the motivations, right? Most humans are very nice in these performance conversations, and there's a need for clarity, right? I think some folks have been hearing in the last year like clarity is kindness. Telling someone you did not meet your goal and this is why is better than dancing around if they didn't made it, right? Well, and then how do you separate from that the growth-oriented conversations, right? Here's where we could see your career going in the future. Here's the potential that you have. Here's opportunities within the organization, right? And how do you actually really look at some very specific things around performance tied to outcomes, right, versus just outputs? So it's something that we think is going to be really important for organizations to continue to try and tackle because it's going to become increasingly harder in the next, now, especially through the rest of this year, to separate performance from an output-driven perspective when workers can get to the outputs faster, whether frontline worker, knowledge worker, other using AI and automation from the outcomes, right, on the business impacts. Okay, so I saw a couple of comments in there from Shelly and Abel. Okay, awesome. So we're gonna put up one more polling question here, and then we're gonna get to the last trend. What would most improve performance management in your organizations? And you can choose up to three again.
Mhm.
Whether that's bringing more evidence and data into assessments, shifting to continuous feedback and coaching models, simplifying the process, encouraging peer-to-peer feedback and recognition. Some examples I've heard from organizations recently, there's actually a lot of excitement around leveraging some AI and automation in here, whether that's helping draft uh, goals faster, draft performance write-ups faster after you've set goals, then using AI and automation to say, I, as the leader, have set this goal. Please make sure that has cascaded to my workers on my team. Make sure that the workers' goals are written in a smart, right, framework, um, and making sure that they're completed on time, and then even using some of the AI and automation to schedule time for like ongoing check-ins and things along those lines, right? So let's see. So we got the poll closed, some responses here. Number one, shifting to a continuous feedback and coaching model. Number two, simplifying the process. Okay. Definitely resonates with what I've heard from a number of companies across industries and sectors as I've been speaking on this over the last 2, 3 months. Okay. So this gets us into our final trend, really thinking about where does the role of the manager go from here, right? And how should managers spend their time if you're continuing to have that role in your organization? So some really interesting data on the right that I think validated what many people have anecdotally been talking about. 36% of managers don't feel prepared to manage people, right? Many folks, many organizations have had this conundrum of I've essentially to provide someone a career trajectory, I've promoted individual contributors into people manager roles, even if that individual contributor did not want to be a people manager, right? 42% fewer positions for middle manager roles were being advertised at the end of 2024 than in the spring of 2022. Right, that gets at some of those questions earlier in the conversation that organizations as they have been looking for more agile work, maybe more teams, maybe it's more of a hey, you're not a people manager, you are now a team leader of a fluid construct that kind of ebbs and flows throughout the year, right? We were also seeing 40% of managers' time was being eaten up on administrative work as well, right? Approving time and expenses, travel, the performance process we just touched on, right? The merit process, ongoing things that aren't necessarily driving value. And so, how could you potentially reimagine taking some of that off of managers' plates and allowing them to get to that motivation of one, right? 78% of workers know what motivates them, but only workers believe only 33% of workers believe that managers know what motivates the worker, right? How do you free up time for the manager to help know what motivates the worker and drive growth and development for them? So that gets us to our last polling question for folks. Really thinking about, what you have heard today. What are some of the key questions that are most relevant for your organization? And so each of these questions ties to one of the 8 trends that we discussed today. And I'll pause, maybe enable, certainly welcome, your crystal ball as folks are answering what you think folks are potentially going to tag on here.
Well, I'm gonna guess why doesn't performance management work? It's probably one, and the other is around motivation. Um, that's my guess. I know at Deloitte we are constantly reinventing performance management. I actually appreciate that we're always trying to be better. So much so that sometimes admittedly, is can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
But I think the lesson there is, being willing to reinvent and be agile about it. I think it's important. I know our shift away from ratings around all that was a pretty big change in focusing more on impact. was a big change as well. So, um, but yeah, trying to make performance management work is definitely hard.
Absolutely. Okay.
Hope I didn't just bias people's answers though.
Um, okay, so we got a wide range of responses here. Top two were in the performance and motivation ones. So Abel, maybe a little bit of nuance there. Actually, then one around the stability, right? How do I provide stability for my workers while creating the agility for my business to thrive, right? So thank you all for kind of sharing and weighing in here on the questions. Also acknowledging, where we are from a time perspective, we really appreciate and I appreciate the audience opportunity to be in front of this audience. I know Abel and team have really enjoyed digging in with the C2HR community over the last few years. QR code in the top left, right? You'll have access to this presentation, but the first QR code actually gives you about a 60-second video for each of those 8 trends, plus some infographics. So very easy to digest. QR code in the bottom left gets you to the full report itself, right? Each chapter is a roughly 15 to 17-minute read. So 8 chapters plus an introduction, 9 chapters, something for a morning coffee perhaps, or a morning tea, or a flight if you're traveling. But I just want to say thank you all for joining. You do get the continuing education credit. You've got the claim code here. But I'll pause to turn it over back to the C2R HR team for any final comments before we wrap for the day.
First of all, thank you, Kyle and Abel, so much for your time today and for sharing the insights from your recent study. We really appreciate it. And of course, as you both have commented, we continue to enjoy our partnership together and your continued support. And thank you to everyone in the C2HR community for joining us today. We will send a copy of the slides and the recording to all of you later this week, and try to get a summary of the polls as well. So thank you again, Abel and Kyle, and thanks to everyone for joining the call. Hope everyone has a
Have a
good
great day,
day wherever
all.
you are.
Take care.